Hello, this is Cheryl Petersen at Healing Science Today. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about spirituality, healthcare, and Christian Science. But I will first clarify that the term Christian Science is usually used to refer to a religion. However, believe it or not, the term originally was used in the 19th century by Mary Baker Eddy to explain a system of exploring the connection between spirituality and healthcare. Mid-19th century, Mary Baker Eddy had a spiritual experience, a piece of heaven on earth. Now, Mary lived a rather privileged life in northeastern United States, and she had the time, finances, and desire to figure out how on earth did this piece of heaven come about. She had worked with many doctors, spiritualists, and a mental healer by the name of Phineas Quimby. In other words, Mary liked to learn, and she apparently did so in the light of science. She questioned, theorized, and tested her theories. She wrote about her ideas, and within a few years she began teaching classes or giving workshops on the subject of spirituality and healthcare. She called it the science of life at first. There was no religiosity involved. She talked about God, faith, and Bible stories because they were the words in the stories that she and her friends were familiar with. It's the language they had. Mary's classes were filled with students from different backgrounds. Some students returned back to their homes and they set up an office to offer spiritual healing to, those who asked by giving what Mary called mental treatment. Mary Baker Eddy was a pioneer in mind study. She taught others how the human mind thinks and how our beliefs affect our health. Eventually, she wrote the book, Science and Health. Anyone could read it. Like any book, they give us ideas to think about, and we can use ideas to benefit humanity and our environment. This business, though, of classroom education and of treating spiritual healing professionally as part of healthcare went on for 10 years. Mistakes were made, corrections were made. All the while, Mary kept revising her science and health. And at some point, she replaced the term the science of life with the term Christian Science, or the science of Christ, truth. 10 years went by before Mary Baker Eddy founded a church. In other words, and this is helpful to know, the connection between spirituality and healthcare is useful, but not tied to or dependent on a religion or a church. Today, we have a growing evidence of the usefulness of knowing our spiritual history as well as our medical history. We have scientific reports on the benefits of holistic well-being that supports healing of mind, body, and spirit. Many of us use different terminology or language when talking about it to achieve the same connection between spirituality and healthcare. Most of us boil it down to the healing power of the love of truth and the truth of love. We ask, what is infinite love? How is unlimited truth revealing itself? Anyway, I grew up with churchy language, and I'll confess right now that it isn't the words that get in the way, but the meanings I place on the words. For example, I believed that if I changed my thinking, that I could experience spiritual healing. Well, that is seriously flawed thinking. Human thinking always changes, whether I change it or someone else does. Spiritual healing involves living, moving, and having our being in the consciousness of not only love and truth, but intelligence, divine intelligence. We can understand, not just believe or think about, how spirituality and healthcare work together. The science of Christ doesn't start with or try to control the human mind's thinking. The science of truth begins and ends with infinite mind, God. It involves spiritual discovery. Spiritual ideas constantly unfold. The better my consciousness knows God as holy and healthy, the better I can know and practice myself this holiness and health in God's image and likeness. Sure, I often look to the teachings and works of Jesus for insight. I read Mary Baker Eddy's writings and sometimes get an immediate inspiration that aligns with healing. But I will go on record to say that reading a book is not the means of healing. God heals. Casting out the misleading belief that a book heals opened my eyes back in the day. I learned the value of not neglecting or belittling the people who were harmed, hurt, or felt betrayed when involved in reading Mary Baker Eddy's books. There are many books on the market written with critical views of Christian Science and Mary Baker Eddy, and they are important for scientific research. Many of the analysis and criticisms demand me to be more honest. Sure, it was easier to stick my head in the sand and think, oh, those critics didn't pray hard enough. But I would only be shooting myself in the foot. So I read and appreciate the bravery of these critics to articulate in the best way that they can. The words are only tools, not powers in and of themselves. They give me ideas to think about, and I want to see the bigger picture. At the turn of this century, I began revising Mary Baker Eddy's last edition of Science and Health. I found things during the process that I wasn't taught in Sunday school or at my class, taught by a teacher authorized by the church. I have no complaints about my teacher. No one is perfect. But any useful teaching must be objective. When I mentioned to my teacher about my inspiration to revise and update Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health, he couldn't speak. But I kept cherishing the idea. Oh, he could talk, he just didn't really give me an answer, which is fine. Anyway, I kept cherishing the idea, but really the whole project scared me since I was trained to believe that Eddy's words were, well, God's. As if God gave us a physical book to heal us. It was when I could adequately work from the premise of ideas and not words that I was able to start revising. A few things here. First, I learned that Mary Baker Eddy showed way more objectivity than I gave her credit for. While reading my favorite words, I failed to see that Eddy flat out explained not only the benefits of prayer when it comes to healthcare, but she bluntly warns readers of the dangers and evils of prayer. Exactly what the critics of Christian Science said. Second, I had to do intense research to learn the pattern that Mary Baker Eddy followed when she revised her Science and Health, which she did hundreds of times until her death in 1910. What did I learn? Still learning. But I speak from experience. Revising is hard work. It takes desire, time, energy, money, and inspiration. Now, I have a copy of Mary Baker Eddy's 1895 version of Science and Health. And of course, I read her last edition. This is the latest cover that I have. But in all reality, she could have stopped revising in 1895. In all of her editions of Science and Health, she states the fundamental premise from which useful, spiritual, non-intrusive healing increases. All is infinite mind and its infinite manifestation. Because that statement is abstract, we have the scientific method for better understanding and guidance. So why did Mary Baker Eddy keep revising? It's scientific procedure, and it's kind. All good science constantly addresses new discoveries and current circumstances to ensure practical understanding. Good science doesn't repeat old terminology or ways of doing things. Thirdly, I learned that Mary Baker Eddy wrote about the benefits of reading from many different Bible versions. This evidence deserves respect and care and humility. Let's face it, we need to say the same thing over and over again in different words and expressions to better understand and practice the science of truth. The Bible isn't the truth. No book is truth or truer. Truth is truth. If someone told me that I have 12 fingers, it's a lie, and that's the truth. A lie cannot even stop truth from being known. I have 10 fingers, by the way. Anyway, more than a dozen new versions of the Bible were created in the 20th century after Mary Baker Eddy died. God, spirituality, not the church or some dogma, is a positive force in healthcare. For study, we have Scripture, and because the Bible, being the basis of Christian Science, spirituality, and healthcare, I incorporated new Bible references in my revision work. 21st Century Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, a modern version of Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health, now in its 7th edition. Now, also available on Amazon Books is the 5th edition and the 6th edition. They're all good. Also available, more recently, is Parallel Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, a side-by-side reading of Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health, her last edition of Science and Health, and the 7th edition of 21st Century Science and Health. Mary Baker Eddy's is on this side of the page, and this is the corresponding text on the right side of the page. It's easy to read. It's quite a book. But it isn't available in digital also. It goes by a page-by-page reading. All of them by Cheryl Petersen. Thanks for listening.